During my January wrap-up and February TBR video, I said that we were going back to the Banished Lands. And if you've been on this channel for a while, you know that The Faithful and the Fallen is one of my favorite series of all time. It won Best Completed Series last year, and the conclusion book, Wrath, actually won Book of the Year last year here on the Fantasy Nuttwork. So to say that I'm excited to be back in John Gwynne's Banished Lands with Of Blood and Bone sequel trilogy is an understatement to the most extreme proportions. And that's why I am just so thrilled today we're reviewing Book 1 and Of Blood and Bone trilogy by John Gwynne. And I also just want to be transparent. A lot of people ask, well, can I just start with Of Blood and Bone and skip Faithful and the Fallen? It's his newest work. I'd like to see John Gwynne at his best. And I totally understand that. And while some people might recommend you do that, I will not. As someone who read the quartet of Faithful and the Fallen, and now is in book one, or completed book one of A Blood and Bone and A Time for Dread, I really would not recommend. I put on my Goodreads review when I gave this 5 stars, and I said that it is a delightful yet devastating dessert to Faithful and the Fallen, and I really meant that. I don't think that this is something that you can just jump right into. I think you'll miss a lot of context, and then if you want to go back and read Faithful and the Fallen, it will spoil essentially the entire plot. So as much as I would love for someone who has never read John Gwynne to run out and go purchase this book and read this first, I really recommend you start with The Faithful and the Fallen, Malice, and then go from there. And if book 2 and 3 in this sequel trilogy are as good as this first book, I think as a whole, all 7 books will make one of the best sagas in all of fantasy. So if you haven't read The Faithful and the Fallen, I think you can watch this review. I'm going to try to be very careful about what I talk about, but I think even just mentioning some tribes' names and certain aspects of this new story and the conflict in it might give away some of the key pieces of that first quartet. So if you're very sensitive to light spoilers for the first series, maybe you can come back to this whenever you're ready to start the sequel trilogy of Blood and Bone. Now, with all of that out of the way and that amazing intro, so I never do mid-week reviews. I usually record in batches on the weekends. It helps me stay more consistent, and I like to get all my ideas out and just kind of vomit at the camera. But I had to do this in the middle of the week because I'm blown away. I'm blown away. I read The Faithful and the Fallen last year. I think it was like maybe March or April. I can't really remember, but it was earlier in the year, so it's almost been a year since I've been with John Gwynne and his writing. And sometimes whenever you take time away and you remove recency bias, you can kind of forget the impact an author can have on you. You can also then start to question yourself and say, is that really the best book I read last year? Is he really one of my favorite authors? And I can say without a doubt, A Time of Dread has absolutely confirmed that John Gwynne is just as good as I remember him being, and actually even better. There's a lot of things from The Faithful and the Fallen that remain here. The quick pace, I mean the blistering pace, flying by the seat of your pants, the exquisite combat writing that not only gives us all the details of every single move and thing happening within the combat, but also giving all that stress and that impact and that tension that we love to see in fantasy writing. Characters that you can really grab a hold of and be emotionally attached to with really very little paper time. He's just exquisite at pointing out things about the characters that some people can latch onto and then some people can hate. Whether or not you love or hate the character, you do have an investment, and that is the same from The Faithful and Fallen to here in A Time of Dread, though I think maybe just a little bit better here in this first entry. But really one of the things that kind of shined to me and really stood out with A Time of Dread is the fact that in The Faithful and the Fallen, with the prophecy and how that plays out and who's telling the truth, yada, 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 we kind of knew the baseline story, right? It was about how we got there in The Faithful and the Fallen. You know, just diverting our expectations, but for all intents and purposes through Malice, you kind of get the idea of what the prophecy is, who's fulfilling what role, and how that ends up playing out is the interesting portion of that series. That's not the case here with A Time of Dread. Of Blood and Bone has now started out with this first entry kind of with an open slate. Obviously, a lot of impact. This is 100 years after The Faithful and the Fallen. So things have changed, but some things have remained the same. A lot of the geographic details have changed. So we have the Land of the Faithful down throughout the middle of the map, which is different because we had individual nations before with kings and queens. That's not the case now. The Banished Lands looks a lot different. A large portion of the middle of the map now with the Land of the Faithful is ran by the Ben Elam. And it's very interesting because we would think that would be, without a doubt, a good thing based on The Faithful and the Fallen. Well, maybe not so much, but It's definitely a mixed bag. Not everybody's thrilled with that. And there are still Azeroth's minions running wild, and they're hunting them down and trying to put, after a century long, trying to put the final boot on that neck and just exterminate them from the land. So right there in itself, you already have kind of a conflict with someone that is a supreme ruler that maybe not everyone agrees with, and maybe they're not just, always correct, or they're not always doing the best for the people of the Banished Lands, of man, the normal person. And that's what I'm kind of talking about when I say an open slate. I didn't know where this story was going to go. And I also just want to note that I think it's really a brave decision and a bold decision when an author, in this instance John Gwynne, decides to do a sequel. A lot of times we see prequels or standalone novels and stuff like that, which are fine, and those are difficult in their own right. But I do think there's something special, especially whenever the last series, the quartet, wrapped up so well. I mean, I thought it came to a beautiful crescendo. The climax was mwah, it was great, and we got a lot of closure. To reopen that wound, to reopen that story, to go back in, it's a difficult task. And I think it's the reason why a lot of movies or authors or any kind of realm of entertainment sometimes avoid the sequels. And John Gwynne didn't, and he went back in, and I think it's good that he decided to approach this plot through a different lens of, well, now it's really a mystery to the reader. We're not so clued in on what's happening as we were in The Faithful and the Fallen, and I actually like that a lot more. The characters here are really, really good. They are people that you can get attached to. At first, I found myself struggling a little bit to get into it because I was missing some of the old characters from the last series. But these stand on their own, and it kind of reminds me how Joe Abercrombie has reinvented his story with new characters and done an excellent job of making them even better. That's something that Gwynne has done here as well. He had a very tall order to replace the last cast, and he's been able to do it largely in this first book. And I kind of want to take some time to talk about his characters because I always put over his combat, and we'll get to that in a minute. But his characters are always really well-rounded, and I think they have some depth to them, and it's amazing that in the short amount of time that we spend with these characters, how much of an attachment we can get to them. And it's because we know them not just for their positive traits, but almost every single character has some sort of flaw, whether they're too trusting, whether they have anger problems, they're prideful, or sometimes they just straight up make bad decisions. And that's something that Gwynne gives his protagonists that make them just feel more tangible and well-rounded. And then it gets you invested in a shorter amount of time because his books aren't tomes. They're not 1,200 pages. And this book was 460 pages. And I was just as attached to these characters as I have been with books that were double this size. And John Gwynne's combat is obviously ridiculous, best in the genre when it comes to weaponry and weapon fights with swords, spears, whatever you want to do. Also, just a lot of badass animals as usual with him, but the bears really shine here, and I'll let you figure all that out. But the combat has always felt high stakes. It's always felt like it was very real and grounded in reality. And because of that, I think he has tied that back to his characters where they also feel very grounded in reality. It feels like someone that you can meet in maybe a fantasy world, but you can know people in your life that are like the characters that John Gwynne writes. And then you also have this pairing of combat that is realistic. It's astounding, right? It is amazing. But it's realistic, it's well thought out, and it adds a layer of emotion to the combat that otherwise, if it wasn't there, I would say that it's kind of flipped, another combat scene flipped through. I don't think that's what happens here. I think because both the combat and the characters are wrapped in a tight package that is well grounded, we can really dive in with those characters in those situations, and it gets you a little stressed out, to be honest. But that is part of the charm of John Gwynne's writing. And honestly, I hope I'm doing it justice because I've really thought about this a lot. I've thought about, I want more people to read John Gwynne. I want more people to read A Time of Dread and Faithful and Fallen, and it's because it's been very impactful on me. I talked to Petrick, and we were saying, I think Petrick said these words. I think he said, John Gwynne's a genius with the way that he is able to write characters that are so emotionally, tied to you, and then also keep this breakneck pace. I mean, I definitely feel like the pacing in modern fantasy can be a little too fast. I mean, you're talking to someone who thought the Dragonbone chair was perfectly paced, almost. So I'm not apprehensive to slow starts. I'm not apprehensive to a slower series. I love The Dagger and the Coin, which some people thought is a little bit slower. I like Foundation by Isaac Asimov. I like these things that some people would find to be tedious. So I don't think I am the prototypical, I love a fast pace, it's all I want. I think I've developed a little bit more. So I don't want it to come across as when I say John Gwynne has this amazing pace and it's really fast, I don't want you to think that it's all just thrills and kills. I mean, it is, but there's a layer of emotion and attachment to it that I also get from writers who do, use a more flowery prose and take a lot longer to build up these stories. He's able to get you to care about the characters and hit those big emotional character development moments in like half the time. And it's his specialty, I would say, at this point, along with how realistic everything is with the weapons and the combat. But that is where I tip my hat to John Gwynne. And if I had to pick a selling point for him, it's that fact that with half of the amount of pages, somehow every time he's able to get me. Some of the big emotional moments in the middle of the book and towards the beginning and stuff like that, like they registered with me and I accepted them, but they didn't hit me as hard as the prior series. And I just thought, well, maybe I'm just not attached yet, or maybe this series isn't going to hit me as emotional. And wouldn't you know it, by the end of the book, I was heartbroken. And the final climax, like the last 100 pages are just absolutely flaming. And in all the right ways, it delivers on a lot of big moments. And John, what did I ever do to you? Why do you always gotta hit me in the feels, man? I mean, I buy your book, I support you. I like getting other people to read you, but you gotta quit breaking my heart, man. I mean, god damn. All joking aside, when you're gonna read John Gwynne, you're gonna get gut punched. And I thought maybe I had made it almost all the way through this book without feeling that gut punch that I'm so used to of the John Gwynne jab, as we call it. And I was wrong. He got me, and I got a little lump in my throat. I felt a little burning in my chest and a coal in my stomach. And you'll see why. But it's just the character had connected with me, and John Gwynne is not someone I think that... A Time of Dread is not a story about killing off characters or having these desperate moments where the protagonists are so beat down. I think he actually balanced it a little better in this book than he did in his prior series. It's not just cheap moments. It's not cheap emotion. It's well earned, and it's through just that blazing pace, the blazing combat, but also the interpersonal relationships that our characters build with one another, and just how desperate they do feel in a time of dread. And I think A Time of Dread stands on its own. I do think you need to read a prior series, but it does stand on its own as a really good entry into the Banished Lands saga. And it's a great opener for a book. I mean, to get you sucked in and sold, I don't know how much better someone could do it. I definitely like all the callbacks to The Faithful and the Fallen. If you are a Banished Land fan, you're going to be rewarded for that from reading that. And really, just the plot, it feels... The Faithful and the Fallen is a little bit more tropey, and there are tropes here, but this feels a little more fresh. It feels like a fresher entry into modern fantasy for the genre as a whole. And I'm very curious to see what happens here in the second book. I want to say there's a POV shift. If we get some, we're going to get some more, I'm sure. And John Gwynne did write from the antagonist's point of view in The Faithful and Fallen, which is one of my favorite parts of that series. I'm wondering if in book 2 or 3 we'll see that. We didn't see that in the first book here with The Time of Dread. I hope we get that, because when you get to see things through the antagonist's eyes, I think that they become more dynamic and well-rounded, just like our protagonists are. And that's really important for a book to hit that upper echelon of fantasy, is to have better villains than just, rah, I'm bad. And I didn't get that from book 1. I'm not saying that, but I think to push it over the edge to where book one of the other series was, I think we need to see maybe a POV from a villain. I think that will happen if I know John Gwynne. I think that will happen in book 2, which I really look forward to. And I think there's a lot of potential here for the antagonist of this second entry into the Banished Land saga, and with book 2 and 3 of A Blood and Bone, I think that the antagonists are actually possibly going to outshine the ones in the first 4 books, and that's something that gets me very intrigued. So yeah, for the price of my heart and my tears and my emotion, I have finished A Time of Dread, and I cannot wait to get to book 2 and 3. Just an absolute recommend here, but again, I really recommend you read The Faithful and the Fallen first. I'm sorry if I took a lot of parallels from the first series, but because I've talked about it so much here on the channel, I really wanted to talk about why it was different. So maybe if you didn't enjoy The Faithful and the Fallen as much, how you could still read this and get enjoyment, or if you really enjoyed The Faithful and the Fallen, there are still improvements to be made in John Gwynne's writing, and he does that very well here. He puts those improvements on display. I thought the writing was excellent. He's not going to hit you with the most flowery prose of all time, but there are times where he just has a sentence or two that really punch you in the face, and I mean that in the nicest way possible. And it's good. It's good. It's very punctuated. And I said this in my reviews prior in other John Gwynne books, but he's just efficient. And I really appreciate that. And it's something that goes a long way with me as a reader. And I'm sure a lot of other people feel that way too. So absolutely recommend. Amazing. I can't wait. I'm going to read book 2 immediately after I get done filming here. And thank you so much for spending your time with me. And I hope that I was able to come across with all of the points that I really wanted to get to, which were just that John Gwynne is so much more than just an excellent combat writer. He is writing some of my favorite characters in modern fantasy while also hitting the super emotional moments. The guy can just tell a story, and he's able to do it in a way that I see other people with the pace, and I see other people with really good characters, but he pushes it all together into a package like no one else. So hats off. Awesome. We'll get to book 2 and 3 here on the channel as well. Maybe I'll just review it as a trilogy after I read 2 and 3. We'll see. I'm not sure. We're not done with the Banished Lands yet, and that gets me excited. And I hope it gets you excited too. If you want to see any more content from the Banished Lands or John Gwynne in general, he'll have a new book out coming this year, which I'll be reading day 1 and reviewing, I'm sure, as long as the schedule works out. Go ahead and hit like and subscribe, and you can turn on the little bell to get notifications when I post new videos. So thank you so much for spending your time with me and listening to me just rant and love this book. I definitely recommend it. Until next time, I hope you're good, I hope you're healthy, and remember to always keep turning the page.